Greetings explorers and welcome back to another leather craft tutorial. For this leather workshop, we're going to be making something that will either add to your Renaissance attire, look lovely sitting on your desk, or perhaps be that essential item you need in your kitchen to keep track of things. What are we going to make? We are making a journal or shopping list cover. That way you can have a custom looking journal, in a sense, that hangs out in the open. Usually that's its main goal, in order to disguise if you don't maybe like the cover of the journal that you have. Maybe you couldn't find a shopping list design that you really like and you don't really want this bright purple or something sitting out in the open. You want something that's more in style with what you want to create. For this workshop, we are actually going to be doing this from scratch. We haven't actually done a formal class on this, so which means we do not have a template. The aim of this video is that we're actually going to go through and show you kind of how we go about crafting an item from scratch, going through measuring out pieces, getting an idea of what we're trying to make, and even the issues along the way of having that original design in mind and having to fix it and go and adjust it because what you originally thought and had planned isn't going to work. So there are probably going to be mistakes, there are probably going to be changes, but as we're going through, I will go through and make notes in the video to let you guys know if anything is different or adjust it. That way you guys don't waste time or leather as you're going through this workshop. So let's go on and see what supplies you guys will need in order to craft your very own shopping list cover. You will need soft and thick leather, a ruler, a beveler, water, sponge, saddle soap, a slicker, needle and thread or artificial sinew, a hole punch, scissors and or Exacto knife, a mallet, an anvil and setter for rivets, stain, leather sheen, ways to apply stain, protection for you and your belongings against stain, and of course, your shopping list pad or journal. An optional tool for this project is a strap cutter, but this can be done with scissors or an Exacto knife when we get to that part in the project. The first step in this project is to measure and cut out your leather pieces. For this project, I will be using a mixture of new and scrap pieces of leather to put together this project. If you are using a new piece of leather, I recommend finding a spot on your leather to draw your design where you will be able to save as much of your leather as you can for future projects. For my thick leather, which will be my front and back covers, I measure out two pieces that are 6 by 11 inches. This leaves about 1.5 inches on the sides of my shopping list. To cut out my pieces, I'm going to go back and forth between an Exacto knife and scissors depending on how cooperative my leather is being. If you are using an Exacto knife, be sure to use it with a cutting board as to avoid damaging your furniture. The soft leather dimensions are approximately 17 by 11.5 inches. The extra leather will come into play as a means of keeping our journal closed when not in use, as well as to add a soft leather trim to the edge of the thick leather. Beware of what soft leather you use. Some are easy enough to tear with your hands. If yours is this thin, then you may need just a little more leather on the edges for easy stretching and then to trim off the excess. The leather I'm working with is thin enough where I can push a needle through it, and it did tear in spots. The tears weren't enough to bother me and added some personality to the project. However, if yours tears and doesn't look aesthetically pleasing to you, go ahead and cut a new piece and save the one that tore for another project. The next step is to water seal the edges of your thick leather. While this does help protect your leather, it also makes a nice smooth edge that is still apparent even under thin leather. In the top corner of the screen, I've included a link to our crafting basics video on beveling an edge. Check it out for more details on this part. Once we've water sealed the edges, we can now proceed to staining. Remember to take the necessary precautions for protecting your furniture and yourself from stain. While stain will eventually wash off of some surfaces, like your hands, some objects like your clothing or carpet might not be so lucky. You may want to do this part outside, though beware it could stain cement. If it's a warm day, this will help with the drying time of your stain. When staining your leather, you can stain both sides if you want, but I only stain the one side and edges, since the other side will be mostly covered by my soft leather. When you go to spray the leather sheen on your leather, we would like to remind you to do this in a well-ventilated area or outside as well, and follow the instructions when spraying your leather. For this next part, we'll be using a strap cutter or scissors to make some strips of thick leather. This will be the binding edge between our covers. The strap's dimensions will be 1/2 inch by 11 inches. For this part, I am using up some of our smaller pieces of scrap leather, so each strip will actually be 2 pieces of leather with a total height equal to 11 inches, just like the covers. I cut out a total of 3 of these strips, but only end up using 2 of them because when I actually put my project together, the rivets that I used were barely too short. Don't worry, it still came out looking great. For this part, you may need a different number of strips anyways, because you want the height created by these strips to be equal or a little taller than your journal or shopping list. That way your cover closes nicely. Also know that you don't necessarily need to use leather for this part. You can use a thick foam, rolled up fabric or leather, as well as several other items in order to add a little height to your journal cover. Now we need to make something that will help stabilize our journal while it's in the cover. For this, we're going to cut out a piece of thick leather that is barely wider than the list or journal we're working with. My leather's piece's dimensions are 4.5 by 2 inches. We are then going to cut out an opening in this leather for where the list can slip through. I also punched the holes that I will need for stitching later. We are then going to trace this layout also on our soft leather. I had marked on my soft leather the right edge of my back cover. That way I have a point of reference. Beware where you mark because it could be visible on the end product. Using this as a reference, I place and trace this piece onto the soft leather. I then punch and cut out the appropriate openings. I also bevel the opening on the thick leather piece I just cut out that will act as our stabilizer. In this next part, I begin to mark and punch a large number of holes. A lot of holes in both the thick and soft leather. This is because I will be riveting the binding and saddle stitching everything else. If you don't like saddle stitching, are intimidated by the large quantity of holes in the leather, or just don't have the patience at the moment for saddle stitching, you can glue the leather together, excluding where you will be sliding in your journal. The goal for this project is for this to be reusable. That way, as you use up your list or journals, you can go through and replace them with a new one. With gluing, you then only have to wait for drying. If you do take this approach, make sure that the glue you use does work with leather, or the pieces will not glue or not glue well. If you are concerned the glue may not hold, you can saddle stitch parts to help reinforce the glue. I still recommend using rivets to help secure the binding and make it a bit sturdier, but you can glue or saddle stitch this part as well. As you're punching holes, you may encounter some that your punch can't reach. If this is the case, either switch to a punch with a greater reach, or roll your leather if able, and if it wouldn't be damaged. Or use a hammer and nail. If you use the hammer and nail approach, you will need a piece of wood to hammer the leather on top of. This wood can be something you buy, or is leftover scrap from a 2x4 or something. It mostly has to be thick enough for the nail not to go all the way through. When you go to make the hole with the nail, you are not whacking it with all your might, because you want to be able to pull the nail out of the wood in order to make more holes. Also try to use a nail that's about the same size of the holes that you have already been punching, that way they stay mostly consistent. Note, the holes I'm marking here in the second row are just so I can get things to line up when I go to stitch. I will not be punching them because that is where the shopping list will slide through. In order to not have any of the natural leather color be visible, and to continue to sport the soft leather texture, I'm tracing out a piece of soft leather to serve as the background for the thick leather where I will slide in the shopping list or journal. This allows for a consistent look even when there is nothing in your journal cover. Alternatively, you could have stained both sides of your leather and use that as the background. Okay, let's pause here a moment. Don't start with the seam I'm measuring when you start to sew. Instead, start with this one. I realized after I sewed the first two seams that I meant to start with that one and got a bit ahead of myself when I did the others. Doing it the way I did here makes it difficult for this seam for the first few holes, and I couldn't find a curved needle until after I finished sewing everything. So trust me when I say, start with the seam circled in red. It's just the soft leather and the small thick leather that has the opening. And with that, now we can start the chaos out of saddle stitching. I will link the video to our crafting basics saddle stitching video because most of the last half of this video is saddle stitching. We will be visiting different points throughout this stitching process to show you what we did at different points when putting together the cover. All other stitching is done in the correct order. I just started with the wrong seams. Remember, be patient and take your time. Saddle stitching takes a while and mistakes do occur. Take a break if you need one during this process.
At this point in the stitching process, I cut my giant piece of soft leather essentially in half. The goal for this is to have each half hide a portion of the binding. The soft leather on the back cover will hide the interior view of the binding, while the leather on the front cover will hide the exterior. This section will be bound by rivets later in the video. Now the latch part. For this part, you can take multiple approaches to how to seal your journal between uses. You can get some leather to tie it shut either as a wrap, or punch some holes in the leather where a strip can slip each end through an opening, and you can tie it shut by sliding it in and out, almost like our last project. You can also get a leather latch to seal your journal. For this part, I will be using magnets to hold the journal cover closed. I will be enclosing each magnet in leather and will make a star-shaped saddle stitch. With saddle stitching or gluing essentially complete, we can now rivet the pieces together at the binding. When you go to hit the rivets, make sure you are hitting on the appropriate surface. This could be a non-cushion and sturdy ground, a granite slab, or something similar. I am using a small, thick metal slab. Also make sure you're using the correct anvil and setter. Both the top and bottom rivet should match up with the appropriate shape of anvil or setter, whether it's curved or has a little bump. If they don't match, your rivet could go in crooked or break. When swinging the mallet, once again, don't use all your might. Just a few solid thwacks. The last thing to do, at least for my project, is to finish the locking method. I repeat what I did earlier by stitching the second magnet between two pieces of leather with a star-shaped saddle stitch.
there you have it, your very own custom leather crafted cover for your shopping lists or journals. This will once again look great with your Renaissance attire on your desk, kitchen counter, or anywhere else that you may have plans for such a crafted item. If you guys enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and we would love to see your guys' very own custom shopping list covers. You can share your wonderful, beautiful creations with us on Twitter and Facebook with the tag #CraftingExplorers. Thank you guys so much again for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to have your guys' support as we're going through and doing these projects and videos and stuff. And so we just want to say thank you again. If you guys enjoy these videos, go ahead and subscribe. We post leather craft videos once a month on Saturdays, and we'll have a more planned schedule when we get our store up and running. We will go through and be able to start posting dates for you guys of, hey, keep an eye out on this Saturday for another leather workshop class. If you guys want to get notified of when these videos get posted, go ahead and ring that bell and you will find out when these videos get posted. Our leather project videos are also usually accompanied by some form of leather crafting basics tutorial. That way, if there's a particular item that we're covering, you can go through and watch it in smaller detail, so keep an eye out for those guys as well. And thank you guys once again so much for joining us. Until we see you guys again, take care. Bye guys.